My first instrument was actually the drums, which I'm still playing now. I started at 2 years old. Yeah, I'm told because my family is very steeped in the church. So I was brought to the church when I was 2, and my mother was there directing the choir on a Saturday afternoon. And apparently I was a bit rambunctious. So she would sort of sit me near the drummer so she could sort of keep an eye shot on me. And I'm told that he got up one day, for a break, and I got on, and I was like standing playing, and I was in rhythm. And that's where the journey began. And I tried playing a couple other instruments, but I just wasn't great at them. And I felt like I had the deepest connection to the drums. So, yeah. Man, it's really interesting because I didn't start playing jazz music until I was about 16 years old. But I always feel like I was being prepped for it because growing up playing in the church, for those that, especially in the African American church, have witnessed that music tradition, it's so organic and it's very much based around the improvisatory element. Now, the difference between improv and jazz and improv in church is one has the spirit of God and sort of in focus. The other has the spirit of quote unquote the world in focus, right? So you're improving in a jazz club so that you can make people feel better, and in church you're improving so that people's souls can feel better. It's all for me, it's very much intertwined. So yeah, I think my informal education very much was very important to me. And then obviously at 18, I moved to New York and went to Juilliard and did the jazz program, actually with Carl Allen and Lewis Nash and so many other great instructors. So yeah, I feel like I have this mix of informal and formal, but I still lean on the informal because that's actually what gives you your intuition and your instinct. And for this music, you really need that. Yeah, probably I think the 2 to 3 really major mentors for me first have to be a great drummer in Jacksonville, Florida. His name is Rick Kirkland. And he was a drummer, played for Ray Charles for many, many years. But he was the first guy that really taught me jazz drums. So he was the one that gave me my first set of brushes. He was the one that really sat me down and really showed me the difference between touch and clarity as a drummer versus just playing funk and gospel. Before that, I have a cousin. His name is Kevin Sibley. He was really the one that started getting me to listen to music. Because the first jazz record I ever really heard, a recording, was Oscar Peterson playing Honeysuckle Rose. And then I heard Art Tatum. So after that, that sort of opened my ears to something else out there, beyond gospel, and I just fell in love with it. But I have to say, to date, the most powerful mentor in my life has been Mulgrew Miller, who left here about a year ago, unfortunately. Mulgrew, I met him September 11th, 2001, when the day that everything happened, unfortunately for New York City. But I met him, and he started coaching me in an improv class at Juilliard. So I went up to him afterwards and I asked him for his email address. Back then everything was AOL.com, and he gave me his email address. And from that year until literally almost the day he died, he and I spoke every week. We spoke all on the phone, via email. He would give me records to check out. He literally was, like I always say, like my angel, man. He taught me this music. And he also, for those that knew Mulgrew, he was one of the most brilliant human beings, who was so great. So yeah, he probably was the person that was the most influential in my life, and still is to this day. I still hear his words, every time I touch a drum set, or every time I do some level of business in the world or in the jazz scene, I always hear his voice. So yeah. Man, I think the first one that was important to me, when I came to New York at 16 to visit family, I took a lesson with John Riley. And at that time I said, okay, I want to move to New York. I want to study jazz music. So John heard me. He said, all right, you sound good. He said, but you need to really get some jazz influence into your playing. So he said, when you get home, I want you to buy this record. And this record changed my life. And that was Miles Davis, Milestones with Philly Joe Jones. And that just lit the fire. After that, I'd, like any normal 16-year-old kid, I'd been listening to, whatever was popular at the time. And after that, I closed my CD book, because at that time was no iPods, right? So I closed my CD book, took all my R&B and soul records out of my little car that I was driving, and from that day forward, it was only jazz for me. And I mean, I've since gone back to listening to other things, but I understood that if I wanted to really learn jazz, I had to focus my attention in that direction for a really focused period of time. Absolutely. I think the first time that I saw Wynton Marsalis was very influential for me. He came to a city in Florida called Fernandina Beach, Florida. It's about 30 minutes from Jacksonville. And he was there actually with Marcus Printup, and he used sort of a house rhythm section from Jacksonville. And watching this man who had this, this amazing horn, dressed clean and was so articulate, it very much changed my life, because before that, I knew that I wanted to have a career in music, but I didn't know that you could be like this great person, an artist, doing that. Because living in Jacksonville, you don't get to touch people who are really successful because it's not a major hub, as though if I lived in Miami or in Atlanta or something. So yeah, that really shook me up in a great way, and at that point I sort of had a sort of a focus point. I was like, all right, cool, this is what I could be, and yeah, so that's probably one of the first great performances for me that I got to actually see. Well, church was sort of my first paid gig, but they paid me so little it really doesn't count. I would say probably the first time I really started to work was again when I was 16, and I started working around the scene in Jacksonville because I was either working with really old musicians or I'd work with musicians at the college at University of North Florida, because a lot of the guys in my high school, they would play in school, but they weren't really trying to play after school. So my first gig was New Year's Eve. I'll never forget, it was a ball at this corporation, and I was working with this guy. His name is Teddy Washington, and Teddy Washington was actually the trumpet player in James Brown's band, I think maybe like in the 70s, late 70s or early 80s. So he had moved to Jacksonville and sort of taken on James's persona and had a band of young guys, and some older guys, and that was like the first time I started getting baptized in the working world. So Teddy, I was with him literally from 16 till I moved at 18. And that was really rewarding for me because I really got the chance to sort of be taught not only the oral tradition of the music, but then you learn some other stuff on the scene too. So it was great. I really loved it. That's a great question. I think I'm always rediscovering, someone. I would have to say that I'm going back, and I've been, listening to some Tony Williams records that I hadn't checked out. Also, I have to say, being that I'm playing a lot with McBride lately, and we've started the trio, or I should say he started the trio that we're fortunate to be a part of, I've gone back and started listening to some Ray Brown trio recordings, because it's funny, when we first started the trio, we didn't reference that. We didn't really think about Ray and Oscar and all that. We really just wanted to form a complete band sound, and McBride had all this repertoire he wanted to perform. So it really was maybe a few months ago that I actually started listening back to some of those old recordings. And it was very nostalgic for me, especially because one of the first recordings that really changed my life was Ray Brown live at Starbucks with Kareem Riggins. And so to now hear myself with McBride, and we're sort of recreating, or I should say, what we've recreated has been compared to some of those records. It's a really interesting feeling, because that was my dream, just to listen to those records. So now to be playing some of the same tunes is pretty. It provides some goosebumps at times. Oh, sorry. Okay. My name is Ulysses Owens, Jr.